I will bring up our slides for today. And there we are. That's now live. Excellent. So let's take a look at our Jewish bioethics text dealing with limited medical resources and ways in which we might find some sort of criteria to guide us if there are situations where we cannot treat, heal, save everyone. I want to say before we get started, of course, we are obligated within Jewish tradition to do all that we can to save a life. Pikuach nefesh is as I understand it, is our prime directive of Judaism, that we must violate 610 of the 613 mitzvot if doing so would save a life. The only three that we are not allowed to violate, the only three mitzvot that we are not allowed to violate, is murdering someone else. So someone is forcing you to go kill someone or they're going to kill you. Um, um, Public idolatry, which now is maybe not so much of an issue, but again, when the rabbis were writing this, the idea was, Rome is in charge and Jews are being forcibly converted. And so if it's you and the centurions and the emperor, sure, bow down privately. You bow down and swear allegiances and oath, whatever, because God knows this is coerced. But public idolatry, because if you as a Jew are being forced to do this publicly, then things must be really bad for Jews. And sorry, what we need is a martyr for the cause, is the reasoning of the rabbis. And so public idolatry is forbidden. And sexual immorality, go rape this person or go commit some heinous sexual act against another, or I'm going to kill you. You cannot violate those three. You have to sacrifice your life for those three instances. So Judaism, ultimately values life and tries to find ways to provide guidance in dealing with life and death situations. Indeed, the Jewish laws with regards to the death penalty were enacted to be so restrictive. The rabbis were terrified of the idea that an innocent person might be put to death by their court. That the criteria to affect the capital punishment and to bring about, actually executing someone was so strict that it was very, very difficult to get a death sentence in Jewish law. So let's take a look. We have a story in the Talmud, interestingly enough, that forms the basis of a lot of discussion in the Jewish bioethical literature about what to do with limited medical resources. Two men are walking in the desert. One holds a canteen of water. If both of them drink, they will both die. If the one who holds the water drinks it all, then that one will reach civilization. Ben Petura says that it is better that they share the water, that the one may not look upon the death of the other. In other words, Ben Petura says, well, this is truly a tragic situation for whatever reason. They have gotten themselves in this situation, and it is difficult to choose. So they should both share the water, even though that means they are both going to die. Better that than the one who would survive would see this fellow die. Rabbi Akiva, however, says something else. Rabbi Akiva says that, quoting Leviticus chapter 25, verse 36, that your brother may live with you. Imcha, Rabbi Akiva says, this means that your life takes precedence over the life of your fellow. Okay? In other words, he sees this verse as saying not that your brother may live, next to you, that you two would share the same journey, that you would share, the same fate, by drinking the water, you would both end up dying, but rather that one of you is supposed to live, that one may live even beyond you. So whoever brought the water, for whatever reason, this person knew that they were going on this trek, that they were going to get into the desert situation, and the other one didn't bring along the water. Well, so terribly sorry, but Judaism is big on, responsibility and consequences. Um, Obviously, this story is an analogy, and there's a whole lot of this that we're missing. How did these two people start off? Why didn't the one say to the other one, "Oh, wait, where's your canteen? You better go get your canteen." So, we're picking up the story in the middle, but it is to demonstrate a point that there is a way to choose one life over the other in a situation where there is a limited resource, and um, uh, and you have the opportunity to save one but not to the other. That Rabbi Akiva believes that it is very possible for us to do that. Ben Petora doesn't think we should decide that. Rabbi Akiva says, however, that we should. And elsewhere in the Talmud, the rabbis teach us that when it comes to certain kinds of things, that there is an obligation to prioritize the life that is involved in some fashion. And that is, if one finds his father's lost item and his teacher's lost item, tending to his teacher's lost item takes precedence, as his father brought him into the world, and his teacher, who taught him the wisdom of Torah, brings him into the world to come. So, what's happening here, we have verses in the Torah where if you should find, a coat, a shirt, or an ox, or a chicken or a lamb, something that doesn't belong to you. If you should find something that doesn't belong to you, your obligation is to take care of it until the owner comes to claim it. So let's say that you find something, but you're not able to, you find two items. There's your father's horse running in the field, and there's your teacher's horse running in the field. And you can only get to one of them. According to the rabbis, you are obligated to retrieve your teacher's horse first. And you have to let your father's horse run, or maybe your father's horse is in danger of being eaten by a bear or something. And so you got to take your teacher's horse. And so I'm sorry, that was a bad example, because if a bear is threatening the horse, then it's going to threaten you, and you absolutely can't put your life in danger even to save the horse. So you'd have no choice. So it was a bad example. Forget that one.
Rabbi, that's a kind
Yes.
of interesting that your teacher comes before your father, because you're supposed to honor your parents, remember? So that's very unusual in this respect. And then
Yes.
other one, which I already forgotten, something that you mentioned earlier. Well, let that go if I remember it.
That's okay. When you do, just shout it out again. Yes, it is. I mean, we could argue, well, who's writing this law? Well, these are rabbis. So we might say there might be some biasness here as to why the rabbis would think that their lost item, this is a fellow, this is a colleague, perhaps, their position takes precedence. But they give some reason behind it, which is that although your father may have brought you into this world, it's the rabbis and their teachings about all the choices that we're supposed to make and the good that we're supposed to do. It is their teachings which brings us into the world to come, which is even better than this world. So their life and your teacher's life takes precedence. But if your father is a Torah scholar,
Yeah.
okay, so he is perhaps maybe not a teacher, but he is a Torah scholar and is respected and venerated in the community. Then his stuff takes precedence over your teacher's stuff.
I just remember
So
Rabbi,
Yeah,
I
go
just
ahead.
remembered about the two men in the desert. Now, when you
Mhm.
see a movie, especially a Christian movie, you would see them, they share that water and then there's a miracle and they both survive. Don't you see that all the time?
Yeah. Yeah, and so our rabbis have taught us one should not pray for miracles. That one should, realize the severity of the situation, and do not step off that bridge thinking that angels are going to keep you from falling. So yeah, we do not live by miracles, and so right. This is why Rabbi Akiva says the one who brought the water, his life takes precedence for whatever reason. So, in this situation, it may be a little difficult for us to draw analogies from this, water situation. But there is something that's being applied to differentiate these two lives. Okay, the two of them are walking in the water. One has something, the other one does not. And so, by processes of analogy, um, that is applied then to, and we know that this takes place when it comes to organ donation, because certain organs are in very high demand. There is a criteria based upon, age and other health situations, professions, these things that get factored into, to whom the organ goes to. It is not always totally random. Your number comes up and here you go, you get it. There are some criteria that are put in place in order, if there is a situation with a limited resource, to try to make the best possible decision, and not just to flip a coin and leave it up to, leave it totally up to chance. And so here, with this story of the rabbis, they're talking about roles within the society, that would be a factor to use to establish some criteria about who should be treated. There are, it's a triage situation. You are inundated with injured bodies. You don't just take them all in, because you may have a very complicated case to deal with that will take more time, whereas some of the other injuries might be less severe and you have a greater chance of saving a greater number of people. So, thanks to, MASH and other, television drama situations where they've depicted the medical world, we've kind of gotten used to this idea, if we've seen any of these shows, where, in those extreme situations, that there are ways to prioritize. We've experienced that during this pandemic. Elective surgeries, even necessary surgeries, knee replacements. This was deemed as an elective surgery in the emergency, in the pandemic days, because the hospitals were being overrun and we needed, all hands on deck. So sorry, if it's not life-threatening, you're not going to have that surgery. And in some situations, maybe even if it is life-threatening, we may not be able to provide that surgery because we've got other more serious cases. So we're kind of used in our information age and having learned of these procedures where we know that doctors and hospitals are making some of these very decisions. Who they treat and the order in which they treat them can determine the outcome. And so we're used to this kind of thought and idea. I want to continue on this story because, again, the rabbis are trying to find qualitative ways, as objective as possible, even though some of it is still very subjective, to try to be able to quantify life in some fashion. And so the story continues. If his father and his teacher were each carrying a burden, and this person wants to assist them in putting down their burdens, you first help the teacher and then help the father. And the rationale is the same, because again, the teacher has taught you, skills and knowledge that are advantageous to you and advantageous to society, more so than your father. So again, this is referring to the Torah verse. If you see an animal struggling with its weight, with the load that it is carrying, or a human being, all the more so, you must do something to help. If his father and his teacher were in captivity, so they've been kidnapped or are being held for ransom, this was something that was historically done, especially to Jews. Jews were often were often kidnapped, and the community would bail them out, would pay for their release. It was a very scary time, but during the medieval ages, this happened on a number of occasions. So if both his father and a teacher were now held captive, your obligation is, once again, keeping with that same sense of idea, you first redeem the teacher, and then you redeem the father. If, however, the father is a Torah scholar, then you are entitled and able to redeem your father first, and then the teacher second. This might also be the rabbi's ways of trying to teach the community, the men in the community, that you should be knowledgeable in Torah. You should be a Torah scholar. You don't have to make that your profession, but you should know the Torah so that your son will be able to save you if you should get yourself into a situation. So here with these two stories in our Talmud, these are the things that then serve as analogies for later generations and our generations to try to begin to quantify, life in some fashion, as to be able to make what, for all of us is an absolutely nightmarish choice. I would not want to be the doctor, the hospital, the caregiver who is in the situation of, because of a limited resource, to have to tell someone, no, we can't treat you and you are going to die. I find that to be a nightmarish scenario, but it is one that happens. Sometimes we may not be conscious of that decision that has been made for us because of our wounds and the situation that is taking place. Sometimes we might very well know. And indeed, sometimes we might even opt for that. We might opt to not have a particular surgery at some point in our life because of our age, of our physical condition. So we ourselves are quantifying that. But it's different if the individual says, I'm 99 years old, and why should I go through this surgery? What am I going to gain from this procedure to fight this cancer or this disease or this situation? I'm 99 years old. And so it's one thing for the individual to do that. It's quite another, I think, to live in such a, Machiavellian time where the person would be denied that. But there are tremendous risks to surgery. And so, the doctors might very well, you might want to have this surgery, but the doctors might need to say, well, look, you've got a bad heart, you've got these other complicating factors. You're not going to survive the surgery. You're not going to survive the anesthetics. You're not going to survive this. And, we're not going to actively do something that's going to kill you. So these then are the texts that are used in the Jewish medical ethics world to begin to weigh these situations. We haven't really talked about genetic engineering and stem cells and all of these other things. There are, however, some interesting articles. I came across one just after last week's session that deal with genetic engineering. Indeed, we had talked about the question of, when it comes to, Tay-Sachs and BRCA1 and some of these other genetic diseases, that if it is possible to remove the genetic code and spare this person and the family those, the horrors of those diseases, would that be permitted under Jewish law? And maybe not under mainstream, not all Jewish law. It's very hard to say Jewish law and mean everything. There is always going to be somebody who is probably going to object to it. But within mainstream Jewish discussions, there is an analogy to this. And interestingly enough, it is the analogy of circumcision. So we have the following conversation taking place. A non-Jew, a Roman influential person is talking to a rabbi and says, look, if circumcision is so important, then, why didn't God create males circumcised? Why does this foreskin even exist? If being circumcised is ultimately the goal, then why was this not created that way? And the rabbi responds to teach us that everything that has come about since the world began needs human intervention to perfect, except for one. That would be women. There is no perfection necessary for women. This is something only done to males. And so there are those rabbis who draw the analogy between the act of circumcision to the act of genetically removing, if possible, these defects to remove Tay-Sachs and some of these other diseases. And so in that regards, there is some analogy to using our technologies to genetically engineer out some of the defects that have worked their way into our genetic code. The same thing kind of goes with stem cells from the standpoint of it's not really a living being yet. And so some would say yes, some would say no. In vitro fertilization is not universally recognized as a valid form of fertilization within the Jewish world. Within the literal camp of the Jewish world, usually the far right Orthodox of the Orthodox spectrum, sperm has a place to go. And the only place the sperm can go is in the woman's vagina and into the uterus to fertilize the egg. And if the sperm is removed from the male and doesn't go into the vagina, then you are spilling your seed. This is the biblical definition. And so in vitro fertilization requires the not only extraction of the egg, but also of sperm in a method that is not in keeping with that literal definition of the Torah. And so within certain branches of Orthodoxy, that option is not halachically yet permitted in a broad general sense. No, sorry, Mandy's barking. Transgender surgeries and cloning, these are things that are currently being discussed. And it's really hard to say that there is any kind of real consensus. There are those who believe that, yes, this should be done, because again, our job, especially transgender surgeries, our job as a human being is to remove suffering. Whether it is, the burden that this person is carrying, as the analogy that I shared earlier, that we saw with the rabbis, if your father or your teacher are carrying a burden that is too heavy for them, well, that burden can also be a psychological burden. And there are those who would look to that analogy and make that analogous connection to someone who feels that they are in the wrong body, are carrying an unnecessary burden that we have the ability to remove and to relieve that person. And so we should allow that. Um, Cloning is still hotly debated, and again, we haven't yet got to cloning a human being. We're close, and I am hopeful that people will say maybe we shouldn't be doing that. Um, it kind of runs contrary to some of the teachings in Judaism. Martin Buber, in particular, taught that every person represents something new, something unique in the world, something that is very necessary and vital to the world. The world doesn't need another Moses or another Miriam. We don't need another Einstein. They all had their shot at this world, and instead, every individual needs to own up to the best that is within them, and be a part of the world in that fashion. And so, the cloning of a human being um, is still frowned upon for the most part within many of the Jewish writings. But that's about, it's still very hotly debated and discussed, and there's no real consensus on that either. So those are those additional items. And that's when we come to an end of our look at Jewish bioethics and some of the text and literature that help guide people who have to make sometimes some very difficult, very, very painful and very difficult decisions. Are there
Yeah,
thoughts, questions, or comments?
Rabbi, one of the things that people in the disability community talk about is quality of life and who determines quality of life. And so people with disabilities say, yeah, my life might not look like your life, but mine is good. And so who are you to decide that I shouldn't exist because my life is different? And so you see this especially with people with Down syndrome. They could live full lives. I mean, and yet there are some places like in Iceland where the government, gives you blood tests and then they pay for an abortion, if it shows that you're going to have a child with Down syndrome. And so, so where do they, who are they to say that person shouldn't become a person? So a lot of discussion there.
Yes, you are absolutely correct, Rita. Every human being is seen as being created in God's image, and yet, how do we deal with these situations where there are those who do not fit our ideal model of what a human being should look like? And indeed, the question came up last week with regards to parents, deaf parents, wanting to make sure that their children would likewise be deaf, that genetic defect would continue for their children. And so that is all part of this hotly debated world. We shudder at the thought that we might turn back to those pages of eugenics in history where we have an idealized form in our mind of what the ideal human is, and not, and to jump off that very slippery slope and end up, becoming monsters because of that, as we saw so much of in the 30s and 40s. So you are absolutely correct. I'm not a medical ethicist. I'm only looking into this world as a medical ethicist. I do know that conversation is continuing to take place. Do we have a right to decide that this, this fetus should not be brought to term? Or on the flip side, to have parents who might say that they want to terminate this fetus because it's a girl and not a boy, or some other kind of situation. So our hearts and heads begin to break when we consider the number of options and what could happen if we started getting into this genetic engineering and really trying to, remove disease, okay, makes sense. Taller, faster, bigger genitalia, really. So that becomes our big balance. What is life, and what is quality of life? And you are correct, Rita. You're absolutely correct. Others,
Yeah, Rabbi, I have a
yes.
question about the cloning because
Hmm.
we're taught that God provides a soul to each person, and when the person dies, the soul goes back to God. So then, what happens to that soul if you clone? I don't even, I can't figure that one out.
Yeah. No, there are those issues as well, and again, that's tying into Buber and very much the mystical thoughts as well. Does the person have a would the clone person have the same soul or a different soul as the person involved? The person that had been cloned. Yeah, so those are some of the spiritual issues that come to light when we discuss it. But and then who is this cloned person's parents? Okay, who are the parents? If you're cloning from cells, then am I my clone's parent? Or not. So there is no clear consensus. These are things that the rabbis and halakhic authorities have pointed out. We can't clone because of this. Well, we could clone because we really don't believe that God gives us a soul, that the soul is part of or not, or what have you. So it's still hotly debated. And all of these things. And then there's the whole question of, if we're cloning this person and this person is a Kohen, but the Kohen is by, the father's line. Well, who is the father of this clone? And would this clone be a Kohen? So, so there's just so many things that are involved in regards to this, that there is no way of answering all of the questions that have come up with regard to it. But uh, some have said that it might be possible in certain circumstances. So, a nightmarish situation that I think was part of may have been even part of a sci-fi film, was that you cloned your body in order to, if you needed a healthy organ, your liver had become damaged, or your heart had become damaged, not through a genetic defect, and so you would clone yourself, and hopefully wait long enough to be able to extract the organ from that cloned body. Those kind of nightmarish thoughts. Because if the clone is identical to me, who has more rights here? It's one thing, again, when we looked at what to do with limited resources, you have a parent and a teacher conflict. And so there were ways of quantifying. But if you have two people who are genetically identical, and have the same aptitude and the same abilities, then how do you make a choice between one or the other? So yeah, these are all the questions that are being asked. Unfortunately, there's no answers yet. I will worry when we start getting a plethora of consensus around the ability to do so. Then I'll begin to worry a bit, because I feel we will be slipping off that edge.
I had a
Excellent question.
comment.
Yeah.
When we consider limited resources, we have a very current issue with that. with the COVID-19 and the issue of there being not enough ventilators. And who did they choose to go on a ventilator? So this is a
Mhm.
very contemporary issue.
Mhm. Indeed, it absolutely was. Fortunately, although I don't know because we're not necessarily getting the full stories out of the hospitals yet. I'm not aware of a situation where someone was denied or someone died because there weren't enough respirators around. It may have happened in New York early on just because there were so many deaths that were taking place and things were overrun that people couldn't even get to the hospital in time. And so, we had that as well. Some of our problem is that when you look at the national statistics for how many hospital beds are available at any given time, just, the ratio, we find out that European countries, Germany in particular, has a much higher rate of hospital beds per population than the United States does. Our rate is very low compared to that of Germany with regards to the number of hospital beds available. So, and we saw what China did when this pandemic broke out. They built a hospital. They built a hospital. And so there are resources that that could have been applied that weren't. And there were better ways of dealing with this. But certainly we were facing that situation. That's why we went into lockdown mode so early, was to try to not overwhelm our hospitals so that there would be hospitals and hospital equipment available for those who would need it. Because it was spreading so fast, the big fear is that, we only have X number of beds available. And we hear about this going on still in some of the smaller communities where they are having to send their patients, sometimes hundreds of miles into the bigger cities to find a hospital bed, and those hospital beds are beginning to disappear now too. So in the smaller communities, there's a real drought of available resources, and they will be facing that exact situation. Thank you, Dina. Well, this has been an interesting look at various aspects of Judaism. I think when we started this way back in March, having gone through mysticism and all kinds of things, Jewish bioethics, we will continue our exploration of looking at Jewish topics, Jewish thought and Jewish idea, perhaps shifting to some great Jewish thinkers, in addition to just other topical events that we might like to discuss. I thank you all for continuing to join us and to be with us on our tea on Tuesdays at 2. I have my celestial herbal wild berry zinger tea. I don't know if I'm going to get copyright slammed on that or not, but we'll leave that. It's up on YouTube. So, and I won't charge Wildberry any fees for this. Any other thoughts, comments, questions, or suggestions of topics we might like to turn to?
I have a question about the Pharisees.
Yeah.
Well, okay. Bob is reading a book on the history of the Jews, and he made some comment about how the Pharisees were bad guys. And so I said, no, that's the Christian interpretation. The Pharisees were the good guys, and the Christians didn't like the Pharisees because they were rabbinic, and the Christians were against the rabbinic. And so Bob said, oh no, the author of my book is Jewish and a Professor Brandeis. And so what about it? What do you think?
I would think it's going to be a mixed bag. Whether they were good or bad depends upon what your thoughts and feelings are about what Judaism should be. We are all today, and Judaism today is descendant of the Pharisees. What we do today is based on the rabbis, which is what the Pharisees became. And they certainly were not as focused on many of the ritual things that were in effect at the time. You had the Sadducees on the one side, you had the Pharisees on the other. And the Sadducees were following, the Torah law. The Sadducees did not believe in an oral Torah. The Sadducees and their belief was Judaism is temple focused, focused on bringing the animal sacrifices to the temple, confessing your sins, and then, it's important what you do out in the streets. But the most important is what you do here in the temple and participating in this rite and these sacrifices. The Pharisees were the antithesis of that. Look, what you do in the temple might be important, but what is more important is what you do in the streets, taking care of the poor, the widow, the orphan, those kinds of things. I don't know if I would necessarily make the judgment that one group was better than the other group. The Sadducees were right following their understanding of Judaism, and the Pharisees were right following their understanding of Judaism. The Pharisees believed in the oral Torah, what becomes the Talmud. And what happens is history took care of the Sadducees. History, Rome destroys the temple. That's it. The Sadducees have no more existence. They have no basis they have no power base. Their focus on the temple rite has just now been destroyed. So either A, we have to rebuild the temple, which is the Sadducean approach, or the Pharisees say we radically evolve Judaism. And so, without a doubt, the Pharisees, I'll tell you what, this will be a good topic for us. Let me make note of this, and we'll get deeper into this next Tuesday. We'll take a look at the Sadducees and the Pharisees. And then you be the judge. We'll let you decide whether or not the Pharisees were bad. As far as the Sadducees go, and as far as those who believe that Judaism should be observing, the animal sacrifices. Yes, what the Pharisees did was, was tantamount to being an apostate. They argued the exact opposite. And so for the Sadducees and those who believe that we need to follow the Torah as it's written, the Sadducees would have been bad. For those who don't believe that Judaism should be focused on animal sacrifice and doing those things, and believe that we should celebrate Passover with the Seder and the 4 questions and the 4 cups of wine and not slaughtering a lamb and roasting it and eating it, then the Pharisees were good. So we'll talk about our Pharisees and Sadducees next Tuesday.
Rabbi?
Yes.
I've been thinking about some of the stuff that we've sort of done in the past, and I was wondering, and it might not be appropriate for tea on Tuesdays, it might be a Friday night thing, it might be a Saturday Torah study, but what about something dealing with interfaith and maybe connecting with the Christian and the Muslim communities and doing something like that?
Would love to.
Time like now.
We are actually talking about doing that for our service of gratitude, our gathering of gratitude here in La Mirada.
Okay.
I've been in touch over the last several days with several clergy, and we are going to try to pull something off doing exactly that. But you're right, we should be doing more of that. So let's see what we might be able to accomplish in that regards. Thank you.
Rabbi?
Yes, Sergio.
I just have one last little comment. Your talk was very interesting, and it made me remind me of a movie that I saw, was Out of the Ashes, where the doctor had to make certain determinations, and some of the things that you talked about were so close, even though it was in a situation, you understand that she was in a concentration camp and she was a medical doctor. She didn't ask to be put in that place. Somehow she just fell into it. And then she had to make all these life decision choices. And then later was criticized for that, So it's very interesting.
Indeed. Thank you, sir. Thank you
Yeah.
very much. All right, everybody. I will wish you all, well, continued safety. Be calm. Yes, it's voting day. I'm sending out an email. I'm sending out an email to our congregation. I want to share, I want to leave us with this thought. I want to thank Peggy Horowitz, who sent me a picture of this phrase. I went and pulled up the full quote. I want to read you the quote, and then I'll tell you who said it. All right. The quote is as follows: "We are not enemies, but friends. We must not be enemies. Though passion may have strained, it must not break our bonds of affection. The mystic chords of memory will swell when again touched, as surely they will be by the better angels of our nature." That was said by President Abraham Lincoln at one of the most tense times in our nation's history. We seem to be going through a very tense time again, further complicated by this pandemic. And it is my hope that regardless of who wins, that we must remember that we are not enemies, but we are Americans and we are friends. So I hope everyone has voted. I voted early last week. If you have not voted, please go do that. Drop off your ballot, go in person. That is the ultimate right of living in a democratic society. We get to elect our leaders. So go vote. And stay safe, everyone. I will see you all next Tuesday.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye, Mark.
Bad disease. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.